guy, you know, if you look just this morning at Con Home, which is a big online page for Conservative supporters, is by far the most popular member of the Conservative Party.
Welcome back to the Late Show Live. Maybe that bar of popular Conservatives was very, very low. He's probably got lower tonight. Let's return to this big news from Westminster. Robert Jenrick has joined Reform UK after being sacked by the Conservatives, and he's already ripping into his former colleagues.
The day after the general election, I said the Conservative Party had failed in government, that there was hardly a principle they didn't betray. Hard taxes? They were left at a 70-year high. Sound money? Well, the debt tripled. Defence? Utterly hollowed out. Work should pay? Welfare exploded. Law and order? Prisons overflowed. In betraying its principles, the Conservative Party betrayed its voters.
Does he know he's talking about the party he was a member of until today? He was literally senior member of that government. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in the studio by former Chief Advisor to Nigel Farage and Editor-in-Chief of the National Pulse, Raheem Kassam. When you listen to Jenrick there, what a state the country's in and how awful it is, the tax burden under the Conservatives, well, how do politicians' mind work that they don't realise they were part of that?
Yeah, I've been dealing with this. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure.
I've been dealing with this all my political life. Is especially Tories who come along and they say, "Oh well, you know, isn't immigration too high?" Well, yeah. You did that. You know, all of this stuff and the hotels policy and the policy that just a couple of years ago Robert Jenrick was talking about with France and doing deals back and forth. It's all part of the same piece. And as soon as they realise, it's like a switch goes off, right? As soon as they realise there's no path to power for them in their own party, oh, well, maybe I could jump somewhere else and do something else. And that's my biggest concern about this, right? Is that I don't think that Robert Jenrick has genuinely been on a Damascene conversion. I think he's realised that he was never going to get to the power position he wanted to be in the Tory Party. Let's find something else.
So do you think Nigel's been courting him for a while, let's say, to come over to Reform, and the timing that they might have been planning obviously was scuppered by Kemi today, but what would good timing have looked like for Nigel, and what would good comms around this have looked like for Nigel?
I think he's probably been courting just about everybody, right? Anywhere that he can. Nigel's big thing, his overarching political strategy his whole life hinges on one word, and that word is momentum. He believes in keeping up the momentum, just keeping the ball rolling no matter what. And he has had the opportunity on multiple occasions throughout this Parliament to do it, and he's done the biggest one so far today here today. He won't even necessarily be concerned about the things you and I are concerned about. That level of, you know, that's built in with politicians. That's built in especially with Tory politicians who once, you know, when Jenrick was elected in 2014, stood against UKIP's Roger Helmer back in the day, who himself was a Tory convert to UKIP in 2011. So Nigel's used to dealing with that sort of thing. He will be looking for momentum and really looking to put the Conservative Party out of business for good. And for those people out there sort of screaming at their televisions going, Nigel, can't you see he's a snake? I assure you, Nigel knows that, and he knows what he's dealing with here. But what I would caution is just how much of a snake those people actually are. And it same applies to Nadine Dorries, same applies to Nazim Zahawi. I think he's got to be very careful. It's no guts, no glory, but it's also very, very dangerous.
When you say be careful that they might be ready to stab him in the back if he looks the other way just for a moment. The thing about Robert Jenrick, for me, and I don't know him personally, I don't know if this is an unfair assessment of his character, but certainly looking at his social media ambition of the last year or so, with him going out with his team and doing these social media videos, which seem more about Robert Jenrick being a presenter than they were about the Conservative Party. So he looked like he had his own success in his sights. Is that not going to be a bonfire of the vanities between him and Nigel Farage? Because I don't think Jenrick will be happy until he's leader.
Yeah, look, we've dealt with this before. Douglas Carswell took a run at Nigel Farage. Suzanne Evans took a run at Nigel Farage, and that was when I was working for him. I had to help put some of those coups down. It's going to get ugly. It will necessarily get ugly. Robert Jenrick is somebody who doesn't like to play second fiddle. That's very clear about the way he conducts himself, the way he thinks of himself, the way he comports himself in public. And Nigel will know that. I don't think he goes into a situation like this morning and thinks anything. I don't think he thinks he can control these people necessarily. But the public plays a big part in this. You know, if one of these people comes and tries to stab Nigel in the back or in the front, quite frankly, as it's tried to happen before with him, right?
As Jenrick did to his former colleagues today.
Exactly. Then the public will have to make a decision as to whether or not they want to trust somebody, to re-elect somebody like Robert Jenrick, a man who used to parade around his constituency with Ken Clarke, a man who voted to remain in the European Union, a man who up until last year was saying all the nasty things about Nigel Farage that the political establishment says about Nigel Farage.
A positive, I would say, for Reform and for Nigel tonight is that this has completely overshadowed the appointment of Zahawi on Monday, which sent seismic reverberations through the Reform Party. My WhatsApp groups were blowing up with people who like Reform. Social media was crazy with it, and so many people that were just saying, that's it, they've lost my vote. Well, fast forward 48, 72 hours, and now we've got this. That's probably played quite well for Nigel.
Yeah, definitely took the focus off the Zahawi stuff. I joked to somebody this morning that I might actually join the Tory Party. There are fewer Tories, but I'm joking. It's a little unkind because you have to remember it comes back down to momentum. It comes back down to can Nigel Farage continue this growth of the party and growth in popularity to 2029? It's going to require some uncomfortable decisions. People won't feel necessarily comfortable with every single MP that Reform wins, and they won't every single councillor that Reform wins, every single policy. When have you ever gone to the ballot box and gone, I agree with every single thing in this party's manifesto? It doesn't work like that. So to some extent, we're doing too much of a purity test on this stuff.
Yeah.
You shouldn't necessarily trust the leader that has brought them to this position in the first instance. But I would just say, look, it's a dangerous game you're playing, Nigel. You've got to be very careful.
Raheem, so good to see you. Thank you. Such fascinating insight. Yeah, come back and see us again soon, won't you? Raheem Kassam there.
There's nothing more important than keeping your money and your identity safe online. And with so many VPN options available, choosing the right one can be pretty daunting. But this video's sponsor, ExpressVPN, is making the choice easier for GB News viewers. ExpressVPN is offering up to 73% off, plus 4 extra months free. That's top-level security from just £2.49 a month, and you're covered by their 30-day money-back guarantee. So just click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code now. Remember, when you're online, you are often sharing personal data, so hackers can steal your information, your passwords, your photos, and your bank details in just seconds. But ExpressVPN encrypts your connection, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your personal information. So why choose ExpressVPN? Well, it couldn't be easier to use. With just one click, you are protected. And ExpressVPN uses military-grade AES 256 encryption, which is the same standard trusted by the US government to guard their classified information. With their new tiered plans, you can protect up to 14 devices at once and manage passwords securely. Live chat support is available 24/7, and it typically connects you in under a minute with a real person. Click the link in this video's description or scan the QR code to get up to 73% off ExpressVPN plus 4 extra months free. Start protecting yourself today with ExpressVPN.
Breaking tonight, leaked audio recordings unearthed by the Telegraph from last year appear to show Robert Jenrick hitting out at the Reform UK leader.
Nigel Farage can't even run a five-a-side team, so he's not going to be able to run a country. They're not a serious party. We may have sympathy with some of the things that they say. We may understand why millions of our fellow countrymen and women have gone to Reform, but they are not the answer.
Does nobody have any principles left anymore? Does nobody in politics have actual ideology and values and beliefs and a very sense of who they are, which means they can steer themselves on a very clear course? Clearly not. Let's talk to my panel this evening in Washington. As I've just said, we have got Greg Swenson and Laurie Watkins, and over in London we've got Charlie Rowley and Matthew Torbit. Let's start here, shall we, in Washington. Now, Laurie, it might be a bit mean coming to you. You are an American advisor on politics. You understand American policy, but I'm sure there are some parallels here. When you look at what's happening over in the UK, your first thoughts about this sort of infighting and betrayal and jumping from party to party?
Well, Bev, we've seen this here over the last decade or so here in the United States with members of Congress. I'll just name a few. If your audience isn't familiar, now they will be. But we have Kyrsten Sinema from Arizona, who's no longer a U.S. Senator. She went from being a Democrat to switching to independent. Angus King from Maine did the same thing. We have David Jolly from my home state of Florida that went from a Republican to a Democrat. We have Greg Lopez from Colorado, who went from a Republican to an independent, and then Joe Walsh, who went from a Republican to a Democrat. So this has happened here in the U.S. Those people are no longer, though, in Congress, so that should tell you something.
Really? That's very interesting, Greg. I can see you nodding along there, because if I was keeping up there, it didn't seem like many of them, well, you only have, you have your Republicans and your Democrats in this country. We've obviously got Reform has been a new party, relatively new, emerging on the right. But do you think, Greg, that when people move to a more right-wing party, which is, to use the old-fashioned term, what Reform is, do they tend to do well under those situations? Do we see this is going to move Robert Jenrick's career onto the next level?
Yeah, I'm not sure who comes out looking better today. I think Kemi has had a really good run the last, 3 or 6 months. And remember, the first year, it was very difficult for her. And everybody was talking about Robert Jenrick waiting on the sidelines to take over. And he was going to be the next opposition leader. And, she started really stepping up and doing some really great speeches. And these things happen in politics. But I think the other parallel, and Lord brought up a great point about some of these people who've changed parties, and Joe Manchin included, who was a great friend of the right when he had these critical votes, and so was Kyrsten Sinema. But I think the other parallel is the MAGA movement within the Republican Party. And so I think, maybe it's not perfect, but you can argue that Reform is the MAGA movement, and the Tories are kind of the country club Republicans of old, the Bush, McCain, Romney party. So I think there's a lot of parallels between Reform and the MAGA movement here in the U.S.
Let me go to London then on that. That's really interesting that Reform are the MAGA movement, Charlie, and the Republicans are kind of the old, the Conservatives are these sort of old-fashioned Republicans. What do you think tonight as we tip into Friday? Has this been a good day for the Conservatives or a good day for Reform?
Well, good evening over there. And I don't like to sit on the fence, Bev, but I think it is probably a score draw. I think you're absolutely right. This was a good day for Kemi. It showed leadership. I think put all the names of people aside, whether you're a big fan of Robert Jenrick or you're not, if you are the leader of the opposition, if you've been in a party that's chopped and changed its leader, that's gone through a succession of Tory plots, if you then discover a member of your team is about to jump ship and name and shame your fellow colleagues, like Priti Patel for the Boris wave, like Mel Stride for the ballooning welfare budget, you've got to act. And she demonstrated leadership by showing someone who clearly wasn't wanting to be part of that team, showing them the door. So she acted rather than found herself in a position where she was just reacting. But of course, the person she has got rid of is someone who might not live up to the standards of US politicians out there, but is someone who clearly in the UK is a good media performer. He courted a lot of the Conservative Party. He's very popular within the Conservative Party, and he will be a net asset to Reform because of his experience in government, when Reform need to form that team of people who have got that experience of delivery in Whitehall. So for both parties, even though it wasn't the way that I think anybody planned, Robert Jenrick leaving the Tory Party to join Reform, it's happened, but it's been in a way which makes Kemi look good as a leader, but it's a net gain for Reform because they've got someone who is very competent and very good.
Matthew, what do you make of it as a Labour man? Do you look at them and think that this is just typical right-wing politics, everybody's slightly in it for themselves? Perhaps that's certainly an accusation that's been made against Jenrick on multiple occasions. I sit here tonight thinking that Jenrick is only really bothered about Jenrick. I'm sorry, I do. I think it's a shoddy way to have left the party in this. Well, obviously he got kicked out, but I think what he was planning to do was not at all admirable, Matt.
I think I wouldn't just call it right wing. You will remember in the last Parliament there were several Tory MPs that defected to Labour for what, you know, career reasons alone. I helped persuade the first one of those defectors, and I will always say defectors ordinarily are looking after themselves and their own career. They haven't had sort of a Damascene conversion, and they tend to be duplicitous and untrustworthy. I think in the case of Jenrick, potentially slightly differently. The parties are a little bit closer compared to Labour and Conservative, traditionally being left and right.
Yeah.
I think Kemi looked good. I think it showed she was, you know, sort of decisive and acted, and she sort of forced Jenrick's hand. He had to do it today, otherwise he'd look silly. On the other hand, I thought Nigel handled it quite well, and they acted quite quickly to get it over the line. I think it's quite a big day for reform, because Nigel Farage has shown he's willing to work essentially with another ego, because Jenrick obviously harbours leadership ambitions, whichever party that is. Whether other people can work alongside him, I think will remain to be seen. But I think, you know, they both come out of it looking OK, a bit like Charlie said. Charlie might be keeping his options open, I don't know, but I tend to agree with him on this.
I'm just looking at what our viewers are saying here. GBNews Rovers has said Jenrick is slippier than a jellyfish emerging from an oil slick, not to be trusted. Let me see what else everyone's been saying at home. Jenrick was right to call out Priti Patel and Mel Stride, says Nick. And David says, careful, Bev, your prejudices are showing. I don't quite know what you mean by that, because I'm not impressed by anybody today. I genuinely, at the moment, as I sit here, I think neither of them, I don't think either party's come out of this well today. I genuinely don't.